As you can tell by the past couple of releases, Dream Theater's 2000 material started off extremely high. And then as we got into the middle, it seemed that it was starting to get a little bit on the inconsistent side, but still top-notch material. With Systematic Chaos in 2007, Dream Theater opted to do something else that was a little bit ambitious. Now, as we spoke about with the last part of Octavarium, the very last song, the self-titled Epic, they took a lot of cues from Shine On You Crazy Diamond from Pink Floyd. Now, while musically In the Presence of Enemies doesn't have that same vibe whatsoever, doesn't have the same vibe in subject content or really anything that's relative, except for the fact that they opted to go with the Part 1 and Part 2 structure, similar to what you saw with Shine On You Crazy Diamond from Wish You Were Here, either that or Pigs in the Wing from Animals by Pink Floyd. But these two songs were epic. Whenever they were constructed all at one time to make one gigantic suite. And they were broken up, that way the themes were, able to be placed sparsely throughout the album. Now, as for the remainder of the disc, it's kind of a mixed bag. There's a lot of good things on here, definitely a lot of great things on here, and then there are some things that are just kind of puzzling a little bit on this disc. Forsaken, the very next track that you hear, track number 2, starts off with a just ridiculous riff, I'll tell you. This is definitely, once again, Dream Theater showcasing their heavy side, and launches into a track that only reaches about 5:35 on the time clock, and is fairly decent. Constant Motion, Dark Eternal Night, things like that, as you get further on into the disc, just kind of continue on. But the one thing that I'm starting to notice is that there are many opportunities and many places on these tracks that seem that they kind of are embracing the carnivalistic atmosphere, especially whenever it comes to keyboard solos or musical solos. And I think that's the reason why some people consider a lot of these, instrumental passages to be a little bit too adventurous, either that or just too much. On Dark Eternal Night, for example, a song that lasts 9 minutes is probably at least 6 minutes worth of instrumental. At least it feels that way. Probably isn't really, but this is definitely something that I know bogs down a lot of people, and for me at least, I didn't enjoy Dark Eternal Night quite as much because of that. Constant Motion was a pretty cool little idea, but it just kind of felt like an average song. It's not until you get to Repentance that things start to really become truly interesting, I suppose. Repentance is the next part, the fourth of the 5 parts of the 12-step suite by Mike Portnoy. And he wanted this one to be a little bit more of a breather, something that was a little bit, more toned down, but also have a very, kind of trippy, psychedelic feel to it. And that was just musically. Lyrically, this is a song that bore a lot of a lot of reminiscence, considering some of the lines you could easily hear in The Mirror, which was written in the early 1990s. It's crazy, actually, how so many years later, you could actually listen to those lyrics, and unless you were a completely obsessed Dream Theater fan for the entirety of their career, there's a good chance that you could have missed that. The second part of this song features apologies and other things from various members of the heavy metal community. People such as Chris Jericho, Steve Vai, Steven Wilson, Mikael Ackerfeet, Steve Hogarth. A lot of names ended up being on this, and the only way that you're really going to understand each and every one of them, with the lone exception of pretty much Mike, is actually if you go online and find a transcript, because a couple of them are pretty hard to listen to. They're pretty hard to hear. Speaking of hard to hear, as the instrumental outro goes, kind of swirls in the foreground, in the background there is a long passage that's being read. Once again, this is something where you almost need to read along at home, because it's a little bit muddied down by the psychedelic effects that the track has kind of put under. Because of this, it's definitely one of those tracks that's kind of eerie. It's kind of heartbreaking in a way, considering we all know that we've done things that deserve apology. We all know that we've done things that definitely require us to take that step and really tell somebody that, well, we're sorry for doing something that maybe broke their heart or at least just hurt them for a while. It's definitely not easy. Some of those are kind of funny, but let's face it, this is a serious thing. Prophets of War of course, is all about the war that was going on in Iraq. So once again, there is another track on another album from a Dream Theater that is kind of politically conscious, only this one's kind of doing it right down the middle. Not a bad song, not a bad track. However, some in the past I've actually enjoyed a little bit more, but you gotta really like the refrain on this one. And then you get the Ministry of Lost Souls. We've already talked about In the Presence of Enemies Part 2, which is the last track on the album, but Ministry of Lost Souls, this is interesting. It's interesting to me because the opening lick, the opening riff, really the opening idea of this is something that's fairly, it's fairly addicting, not to mention it's something that can really provoke an emotional outpouring immediately. Now, this is one of the songs that you can definitely tell has an extreme amount of personal value. Considering all the lyrical content of this one, it's certainly somebody who seems to be at odds. And not at odds such as at war, but mental odds. There's a lot of different things that kind of swirl around this track that make it just a real blend of metal, rock, and just prog bliss. And don't tell me that later on in the song, whenever it goes back to that original first riff, that you don't tear up a little bit because of the way in which it's presented. Especially whenever you hear James LeBray's soft voice directly afterward. Overall, this album isn't bad. I remember a lot of people gave it a lot of crap whenever it first came out, and I never really understood why. I always found the album to be, pretty decent. Not one of their best, but definitely no slouch. I would probably put this right in the middle of the road as far as the Dream Theater discography went. But now it's time for us to kind of undergo some cloudy skies. It's time for us to walk into some black clouds and hopefully find some silver linings.